Hello, students. Paulette, Professor Stevenson here with this week's wrap up. Couple of things about what's coming up in the next week before we get into the discussion. Um, Next week, you all are set to meet in your curriculum design groups. I've tried to keep up with what's going on D2L in terms of your groups. This is my first time using D2L, and I'm not quite certain of how the groups are set up and if that's useful to you all. I haven't heard from anyone who said, I can't find my group or I can't do this. If it's not useful for you, you all are welcome to use whatever technology you want to contact your group. Hopefully, find each other, hopefully you can get each other's emails through the class, and then you can text or call or Skype or whatever. I don't need to be recorded or brought in to your curriculum design group. It's totally up to you guys in how you want to meet as an online class. Obviously as flexible as you can be. So if somebody's Skyping in and a couple of people are calling in, that's fine. I know the university supports Adobe Connect. I know Zoom is really easy to use. I know Google Hangouts can be helpful, but the university doesn't have Google Mail. And I want to say that Skype is through the Microsoft Office stuff. So really, it's whatever is up to you. I would like you to have met this week and completed the activity for the number 1. And that is under week 3. That's where you'll find the assignment sheet for that is under week 3. Curriculum meeting, it should say meeting number 1 guidelines, and you'll click on it, and it's just a document, and it gives you what I want from this. But know too that I want you to produce this. I'd like your group to meet and produce this week. I don't need it this week. This is part of that larger curriculum design portfolio that you'll put together at the end of the semester. So this is building upon it. So this is once you guys put this together and you revise, maybe you don't revise it, maybe you put it together as a group and you love it exactly how it is, that's perfectly fine. Maybe you guys had a quibble about something and you wanted to make it your own and do it your own way, that's perfectly fine. You'll put that in to your curriculum design portfolio, and that's turned in at the end of the semester. Okay, I'm happy to help at any point in this stage, by the way. If your group finishes the assignment sheet or finishes the first one and you're like, hey, we want you to take a look at this, or we need help or whatever, dial me in, or not dial me into the group, but send me an email and I'm happy to help. Same thing with if you're having trouble meeting with your group. Sooner than later, send me an email or something and I'll try to make sure I can help connect you. What I have is the university system and D2L, so that's what you'll be getting. So hopefully it's not too confusing. The goal is for you to meet with your group in some capacity. Obviously, I know that meeting in person is probably nearly impossible, so that's probably off the table. If you can and you want to, that's great. But at minimum, maybe it's a conference call, a Skype call, Adobe Connect, or Zoom. So send me your questions that way if you have them. Loop me in if you need help. Otherwise, I don't need to be a part of your you don't have to record. You don't have to tell me you met. I trust you guys. So let's see. So that's the big weird thing happening this week, and I'll probably ask next week, or try to ask, or one way or another, how that went, to make sure that it's going to go off without a hitch the next 2 times that you guys meet. in these groups in the semester. So, okay. Discussion. I really liked Allie's questions. She asked a lot though, and you all felt the need to answer all of them. What I'll say in the future is if somebody asks like 10 questions, and I don't remember exactly how many she asked, but if somebody asks a lot of questions, you don't have to answer every single one of them. I'm okay with you just kind of like focusing on a couple and drawing from the readings and kind of going from there. Okay. So that's fine. So what I just want to do is I want to hit the highlights of discussion, hit the highlights of some of your responses and discussion, just like I did on the first week. So the one thing that I will say about this week's reading is that you're getting kind of the history. This is like a whole scholarly field. It is the history of college composition. So you're getting like a very small hit of it. And so, you've got Sharon Crowley who comes in and says, and kind of seats it. She gives us kind of the history of American colleges being very rhetorical and liberal artsy. And then the German model comes in, and we're about specialties and all of a sudden kind of the whole person, the liberal artsy stuff, like educating citizens, kind of goes away. And then what we get out of like the Harvard test is that the standardization of the field, where some people like, here's the standard, and this is where, if any of you teach basic, we call it basic, or your school could still call it remedial English, like this is exactly where you get it. So yeah, the Fulkerson piece, not a lot of you mentioned it, but he's really grumpy about what he calls the social turn. So in the 90s, where there's academia at large is starting to get into thinking about race and class and gender and all of those things. And he gets really grumpy about it in his piece. And he, especially as it relates to composition, because he's like, hey guys, we're here, we teach writing, we don't teach feminism, or we don't teach race theory or whatever. And I thought I'd get a lot more people quibbling with him, but I don't. But maybe by the time we get to the weeks on critical theory, you'll be like, oh, now I remember what he's talking about. And that's interesting. One of the things that you'll notice in the history is that there's this tension. Like, a lot of you talked about the canon. Allie had the question of the canon. There's definitely tension between literature and rhetoric and composition. Any of you who have your bachelor's in literature will know, and maybe a couple of you who teach at the university or the college level and did TAs will know that a lot of people who, like in my department, for example, people who go to get PhDs, and some master's students can also get TA-ships, but they're getting their PhD in literature. The number of courses that those people can teach in literature are really small. So, right, there's maybe like 5 of those offered every year for TAs, because, the tenure track literature professors have to teach in there. So they're stuck, if that's what you want to say, teaching first year writing. And admittedly, at first, a lot of people are like, why do I have to do this? And in my program, I know I mentioned this in the comments, or maybe in my post, the policies of my first year writing program is that you're not allowed to teach fictional writing in there, because it's very rhetorical. So Sharon Crowley actually taught at my department before I was there. She retired right before I came in. And so she has a textbook called Ancient Rhetoric for Contemporary Students. And so she's it's composition through a very rhetorical lens. And so there's that tension. Because again, we're a field where a lot of us, maybe not a lot of us, some people came in to definitely be literature professors or teach great books and teach poetry and all of those things are valiant efforts, but then when it comes down to it, the universities and the secondary ed schools need us to teach student writing. So that's kind of the thing, is that there are probably a lot of people who didn't think about teaching writing who are now here teaching writing. And so, so that's the split. And that's still like not an issue, but that's still something that's going on in the discipline as we speak. So Allie's question about the university, like what is it for? Aaron talked about the point of the required course is not to acquire some skill level or knowledge that can be measured upon exit. It's instead to subject students to discipline, to force them to recognize the power of the institution, to insist on conformity with its standards. So he pulled that quote from Crowley, and that's kind of where she's at with that. And so Lori talked about this too, and she said, to this day, many students believe that they have not mastered English, and they expect English courses to be grammar oriented, difficult, and irrelevant. So that I think that there's a lot of like students and like other people who come in and hear that you're a writing teacher don't quite understand what we do. We don't teach grammar. Yes, we, help students think about editing and when to edit and where that goes in the process and why they should edit. But we don't always, at least in a first year writing course, we don't always get to that part because we're so busy teaching them process and rhetoric and genre and other things. But then, right, so difficult, grammar oriented, difficult, and irrelevant. And yeah, so there was this, Austin talks about the literature part. He says the urge to teach literature because we like literature honestly seems like it could be a pitfall in composition courses unless it's implemented. One of my fellow first year TAs is using the graphic novel Persepolis as the basis of her students' first paper in her section this semester. Using a central novel or other book-length text for one unit rather than a collection of related shorter texts is something I might try in the future. So, like, I think that's interesting. Like, Austin seems to understand the pitfalls of it, but also the pull of it. Sometimes, and that's one of the themes, or not the themes, is that theorists are trying to give first-year writing a knowledge base. And sometimes we have to, like, composition teachers get really stuck in, well, if they're writing about something, like if we theme our course, that's one option. And later on in the semester, you'll see that a group of the one movement in the field is to theme it about writing. So there's literally a movement called Writing About Writing, where your writing course, the subject of it is about writing. So you're very like meta about it, which is interesting to some people and then maddening and boring to others. So this is why our field is so diverse. So the issue is students write to their own language. Not that it became a hot button because nobody got into like a crazy fight or anything, but you guys were split. Like some of you were like, yeah, I can really understand how diversity in dialects is there and I get it. But then some of you were like, nah, I'm a traditionalist. Like academic English is, academic English for a reason. And I think it's interesting to, and especially in light of what Crowley says in the article, like think about standard academic English and where it comes from and who it includes and who it leaves out and who it makes measure up to that. Knowing that what Crowley talks about is this Harvard freshman English class and their exam. And so, and the academy has a lot of problems with who it excludes all the time, right? So the Seth Kahn's article about non-tenure track and adjunct, right, the Anyone Can Teach Writing article, his article about that also talks about who the academy excludes. So the academy excludes, has historically excluded women and people of color, but it's also excluded people who don't have full-time tenure track jobs there. So I think it becomes difficult to disregard the kind of social political context of students' right to their own language and what academic English is. That said, when we get to, you guys had a good discussion on the process versus product stuff. That said, in a lot of ways, it's tough to ignore the product of writing, is that you have to produce something, and at some point it is either good, so somebody has judged it as good, a professor has decided it meets some sort of standard, or it has succeeded in what it's supposed to do. So you wrote an article that got published, right? That's a win too. Aaron talked about how the way that we could do this is we could grade both process and product, and he said he does, and that's great. Dana said she doesn't think that administration cares too much about process, and that's kind of noted sometimes. I know that my department has students turn in portfolios for assessment, and they really are only trying to assess product. They want final papers. They don't want process. They don't want messiness. They don't want the brainstorming. They want final papers because they want to be able to match up, everyone's writing in the class. So that's difficult. Anyone can teach writing. Chris, if any of you have ever are thinking about teaching college writing, I know a lot of you have talked about it and doing it more long term. Go read Christina's post about adjunct life, and I've lived it, and everything that she says about it and everything that Seth Kahn writes in this paper and elsewhere is definitely something to think about. Because as Anthony said, adjunct professors are accepted and expected to carry such ridiculous responsibilities for such little pay. And it's one of the gravest inequities of our field and probably it's for the university. I don't know how to fix it, but it's definitely a huge problem. Other things you guys talked about in discussion. So you guys had some good talks about curriculum. Allie went back and talked about, comparing us to math, talking about a student who couldn't multiply. And so getting back to that process versus product debate. Anthony, wondering about doing away with freshman English and create a more fluid feeling system between K through 12 school system and the post-secondary academic campus. That's ultimately where Sharon Crowley comes to, is that we have to get rid of first year writing because all these adjuncts out there, we're exploiting adjuncts and TAs and whatever, which, at this point, it's such a huge market. It's difficult, but it also is to have a more, read it. We're not reading it, but if you're interested in that, and it looks like maybe Anthony is, you should read it. And then I forgot who mentioned this, but dialect, talking about how a brief history of 7 killings. I would add Toni Morrison books, and you all are amazing readers here, it sounds like, so you probably have other examples of really successful novels that have examples of non-standard academic English in there. So anyway, good discussion. I'm sorry this went a little bit long. It took me forever to kind of talk about the curriculum design group, but again, the whole goal is to get together and work on this one thing. However you do it, I'm fine with it. Wherever you need to loop me in, send me an email. And so next week we are into the Guide to Composition Pedagogies, and we're talking about expressivist and process pedagogy. And so lots of good stuff there. And yeah, so like last week's the history, and now we're kind of getting into like, okay, here's this pedagogy. So just the way the Guide to Composition Pedagogy said. So definitely thinking about getting really specific into the pedagogy, into the theory of the pedagogy part. So awesome. Have a great week. Thank you.